Central bank policies have brought on poverty, and this will undoubtedly lead to civil unrest, riots, and chaos in the streets. I'm going to unveil this to you today, how this is related to what the Federal Reserve and other central banks are doing. You came here for the truth. Let's get into it right away. This is the S&P showing you the disparity between 2014 and 1987. They practically mirror each other here when you overlap them. And this is something very frightening because the market cannot handle this. And 1987, for those who haven't read about it, was a very generous crash that was something I've talked about in my book, as well as really in depth in the book Infectious Greed by Frank Partnoy. Really a good read there. So let's go into that right away. What I wanted to get into was the bond market. In just the last month alone, American banks increased their holdings of U.S. Treasuries by $54 billion to a record $1.99 trillion. Citigroup has $104 billion worth of bonds, and that's up 20% from last year. So they're choosing other places to park their money. They perhaps are diversifying out of stocks and into the bond markets. And what does that do exactly? Well, it continues to inflate this bond bubble, and bonds aren't exactly a safe haven when you think about it, because countries around the world have gone bankrupt before. You can see the default that's taking place in Argentina is big news right now, and it's happened many times historically in various countries, and this could happen again, and assuredly it will happen, particularly in Europe. We're seeing a lot of the cracks appearing as the ECB needs to step in and fill the void. So let's get into that $42 trillion bond market. Just wanted to mention that, not necessarily get into the article out of Bloomberg, but basically wanted to show you that the bond market is huge. You're talking about tens of trillions of dollars, all inflated by these policies that the central bank gives easy money, and we know where it goes. Now, this right here is the top 0.1% wealth share in the United States, starting in 1913 all the way to 2012. And 1913 is a very important date. That's the beginning of the end, talking about the Federal Reserve. When it began, when it was signed into law, that's when there was massive wealth inequality. And then you look, after the industrial boom there, right after World War II, you had, a strong middle class that took place for decades. And then, of course, that changed. 1971 really changed it all. And you could see the rising inequality that's been growing ever since. And it's getting worse and worse. And, of course, you've seen the statistics before, how this is something that is really becoming a huge problem as there are more rich people out there, and I mean the real super rich people. And you could see this statistically with luxury cars being purchased at an all-time high, and the housing in Manhattan, certain homes are going for hundreds of millions of dollars in major cities around the world. And that's, of course, the disparity when you see the rising poverty that is taking place, with over 100 million people on some sort of food assistance program in the United States alone. This here is interesting. 4 German banks on the brink. And I just wanted to mention that they're going through stress tests right now, and we've seen how fraudulent the stress tests are, but if they are to be even remotely accurate, they will see how weak they are, but they will never include one thing, and that's very important, something I bring up very often and a lot of other financial analysts do not get into, and that is the derivatives market. This is Dutch banks' derivatives exposure. I'm showing right at the bottom, the highlighted portion, $54.7 trillion worth of derivatives. That dwarfs the bond market, that dwarfs the stock market, and I should mention that's 54 trillion euro, and you need to really factor that in. You're talking about 75 trillion. It's exceeding the GDP of the whole world, in fact, and we're not even getting into all the other trillions of dollars that all these other banks have. So let's get into this, graphically showing you how bad this is. The German GDP is the little one on the left there, 2.74 trillion, and then the blue one is the Eurozone GDP, 9.6, and then dwarfing that by many fold, you're talking about $54.7 trillion. That's Dutch bank alone. This is something that can't be paid back, cannot be bailed out. It is something that is obviously getting ready to collapse. It's exactly why I drew an upside down pyramid in my book. At the bottom, real assets, on top of that, fractional reserve banking, which is bad enough as it is, and then you have the derivatives, and on top of that, it's just so massive. It is weighing down upon it, and will undoubtedly, with a small gust of wind, it will topple this upside down pyramid right over and will crash everything along the way. But of course, before that crash happens, they will use these derivatives to hold us hostage. That's something that I've mentioned many times in interviews I've done out of Bloomberg. This issue is not just isolated to the US, not just isolated to the UK. This is China as well. China's People's Bank of China said to plan a $33 billion bank injection, and they ran here at the highlighted portion. China's central bank is planning the injection of about 200 billion won into some national and regional leaders to stepping up the stimulus to support economic growth. They believe the same policies as the US and the rest of the world do, that if you somehow print money from thin air generated by the central bank into the other banks, it is somehow going to stimulate growth. That has never worked. I would even favor public works projects over this type of work because it simply doesn't ever work. There has never been a situation in all of history where printing money has saved an economy. Look at Japan as an example, where they are continuously needing to print more and more money just to keep where they are. They are not doing better than they ever have over the past few decades. They are simply printing more money to keep everything the way it is. Italian bonds gain as the ECB preps asset buying. Greek debt rallies. This is interesting that they mention Italian and Spanish bonds, because I talked about in my book how they were going to have to bail out Italy and Spain because they are weak, because they hold too much debt. So any country holding too much debt is going to need a bailout. That's pretty obvious. And then you know that they will need to continue to get bailed out because of the fact that the IMF will come in, or the other governments in the EU, for example, will come in and they'll basically tear apart that country, and it will never be the same. So what they said was Italian and Spanish bonds advanced for the first time in 3 days after the ECB said a legal act enabling it to buy covered bonds, a component of the stimulus program, will come into force tomorrow. So right here, they're saying they're going to print and print and print, and it's going to allow them to stimulate the economy. Is never going to work. I'll go on quickly. California still has the highest U.S. poverty rate, and I just show that to address that. In fact, many of my viewers are from California specifically, and the U.S. obviously being a big portion. And what I wanted to say was that you have nearly a quarter of people in California in poverty. This is something that is shocking to me. It should be shocking to you, but of course the mainstream media doesn't report it. They just look at the national unemployment number, which is a complete fake. You know that. I don't need to get into it today. I just wanted to show you that these numbers are going to expand. It's getting worse. The poverty is increasing all across the US. You're going to see civil unrest. You're going to see riots, upheaval in the streets. You saw that happen in major cities around the world, London being just one of them, which I covered in my documentary that I did on my main channel page. You've seen it before. You've all seen those videos take place in many countries in Europe. It is going to happen. It's going to get worse, and things aren't looking better because they're continuing the same policies. I hope that you found this informative. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, and don't forget to become an insider. The Insiders is where I give out all my best intel for free, and that is available at themoneygps.com. You scroll down to the bottom and fill in your email address, and you get occasional emails from me.